Judge Darian Cole never imagined a simple drive home would end with guns drawn and his name smeared across the news. Accused of stealing his own car by two white officers, his calm protests were ignored because he was a black man in a luxury SUV. Body cam footage was doctored, headlines twisted, and suddenly the respected Atlanta judge was painted as a criminal. What happens when the law turns against the very man sworn to uphold it? Darian's fight isn't just legal, it's survival. Subscribe now if you believe truth still matters. The next twist in his story will leave you speechless. Judge Darian Cole stood alone in his East Atlanta living room, the boarded-up window still bearing the scars of the brick thrown in the night. Its hateful message scrawled in black ink, a cruel reminder that his skin color, not his accomplishments, still defined how the system saw him. Just days earlier, he'd been a respected voice in Georgia's legal system, a black judge known for his razor-sharp rulings and tireless advocacy against police misconduct. But now, he was the hunted. All it took was one lie, one manipulated body cam video, and suddenly Darian became the villain in a story he'd spent his life dismantling, framed for stealing his own car, slandered online, then arrested during a live broadcast of his courtroom session, each move orchestrated by a white police captain with a long grudge and a short temper. Paul Decker. But Darian wasn't the kind of man to bow under pressure. Even with his reputation shredded, his daughter expelled on fake drug charges, and his home under siege, he refused to disappear quietly. What Decker didn't know was that the same mind Darian used to take apart corruption in courtrooms would now be used to expose the very system trying to destroy him. It began with a traffic stop. A routine drive home, a calm evening, and then red and blue lights. Officer Laura Hensley's icy stare and refusal to even glance at his registration turned into backup, arriving, guns drawn, and Darian face down on the hood of his own Escalade. Even after showing his ID, Judge Darian Cole, Superior Court of Fulton County, they claimed the car was stolen. The next morning, a doctored body cam clip surfaced online. It showed Darian stepping out of the vehicle, firm but controlled, and then cut to a moment where the officer barked, "Hands on the hood." The edit erased context, erased truth, and left behind one thing: a black man perceived as threatening authority. The backlash was instant. News anchors speculated about his temper. Online trolls flooded his inbox with death threats. Protesters chanted for his resignation outside the courthouse. A sealed juvenile record from decades ago, shoplifting at age 15, was leaked and spun into a smear campaign. And behind it all, moving like a puppeteer in the shadows, was Captain Decker. A man Darian had ruled against in multiple cases involving police brutality. A man who swore he'd get revenge. Darian fought back with the only weapon he had: the law. He filed a complaint, hired a lawyer, pushed back hard. But that only escalated Decker's attacks. Darian was arrested again, this time for drug possession after 10 ounces of cocaine were planted in his car. His 16-year-old daughter Nia was expelled after officers working with Decker planted weed in her school locker. A brick was thrown through their window. Blood was drawn. And the message was clear. This wasn't about justice. This was war. But Darian didn't fold. He stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by activists and cameras, and told the world what was happening. "They're trying to silence me because I've spent my life calling out corruption. But I won't stop. Not now. Not when my daughter's safety is on the line." Public sympathy surged, briefly, until Decker struck again. He paid a former inmate to accuse Darian of assault from years earlier. It was a lie, easily disproven in court, but the damage was done. The media flipped. His lawyer quit. Darian was suspended from the bench. That's when they tried to kill him. A hired hitman rammed Darian and Naya's car off a bridge late one night. They survived. Barely. Pulling each other from the wreckage and crawling out of the river, bloodied and soaked, as the hitman disappeared into the dark. With nowhere left to run, Darian turned his pain into strategy. Using a burner phone slipped to him by his loyal clerk, Sophia, and the technical brilliance of her hacking skills, they traced the hitman back to Decker. A voice recording, bank transaction, and burner call became the backbone of a case that the FBI couldn't ignore. So Darian set a trap. In a rusted warehouse on the edge of Atlanta, he live-streamed himself confronting Decker. Every second broadcasted. Every word captured. When Decker charged with a pipe, Darian didn't just survive. He forced a full confession out of him while 50,000 people watched online. It was over. Or so he thought. As the FBI arrived and hauled Decker away in cuffs, Officer Hensley, now suspended and mentally spiraling, crept out of the shadows and fired a shot at Darian. The bullet grazed his neck, a breath away from ending him. Still, he lived. Still, he endured. And from his hospital bed, he learned Decker had been found dead. His throat slit hours after his arrest. Hensley confessed to the killing in a psychotic breakdown. Darian's name was cleared, his bench reinstated. Georgia's governor formed a task force on racial profiling in honor of the chaos he survived. And yet, just when Darian allowed himself to believe the war was over, a plain white envelope slid under his front door. Inside, a single note in bold black ink. "You're next," his breath caught. The war wasn't over. The system was bigger than one captain, one rogue cop. It was deeper. It was rooted. And now it was watching. So what will Darian do next? Will he finally strike at the heart of the system that tried to break him? Or will this note be the beginning of his end? Subscribe now if you believe one man can change the system. Drop a comment if you're rooting for Darian to fight back, or number 2 if you think the shadows are closing in too fast. Don't miss what happens next, because Darian Cole isn't done. Not by a long shot. Judge Darian Cole sat stiffly in the back of a squad car, the cold bite of steel handcuffs gnawing at his wrists as red and blue lights strobed across his face, reflecting off the windows of the Fulton County Courthouse, where just hours earlier he had delivered a ruling with the same gavel now locked away in his desk, collecting dust and doubt. His crime? Obstruction of justice, they said. But Darian knew what this really was. Retaliation. A vendetta. A brutal chess move in a game that had stopped pretending to be fair. It started with a lie. One crooked traffic stop by Officer Laura Hensley that spiraled into a viral video, a torrent of online hate, a campaign to destroy his life and legacy. He had proven the drugs found in his trunk were planted. He had walked out of court vindicated. But he hadn't seen this next blow coming. Captain Paul Decker, the real puppeteer in uniform, had pulled strings behind closed doors, calling in favors, whispering into the DA's ear, twisting Darian's act of identifying himself as a judge during Hensley's stop into an accusation, intimidation, coercion, obstruction. And now, Darian's hands, the same hands that once flipped through legal briefs and guided juries to justice, were shackled like a common criminal's as his daughter Nia waited at home. Arms still bandaged from the brick that had shattered their living room window and torn through her skin like a warning shot. Inside the jail, the orange jumpsuit burned against Darian's skin, every scratch a reminder that the law did not protect him, it hunted him. The cement walls of his cell pressed in, thick with mildew, suffocating with the scent of despair. The food tray shoved through the slot in the door was cold, gelatinous slop that congealed under fluorescent lights. He couldn't eat, could barely sleep. The cot beneath him was nothing but metal with a paper-thin mat. And when he tried to rest, it wasn't peace that came, but the echo of his daughter's cries when she saw him arrested at gunpoint, or the weight of her small hands clutching him after the courthouse protesters turned from allies to enemies. "Dad, what if they take you again?" she had whispered, and now those words rang in his head louder than any siren. He didn't belong here, but that didn't stop the guards from treating him like every other inmate. One grizzled officer smirked as he walked by, whispering, "Judge now, huh? Not so high and mighty anymore." Another accidentally spilled a cup of black coffee on Darian's only change of prison-issued clothes. Showers were timed to the second, and twice he slipped on the slick floor, landing hard on his back, the bruises blooming like ink across his ribs. Once, someone jammed the slot in his door, delaying his dinner until late night. "Sorry, Judge," the same officer had sneered. "Didn't see you there." When Jamal Carter, his lawyer and old friend, posted bail again, $10,000 scraped from Darian's retirement savings, he emerged into a city that no longer saw him as a symbol of justice, but as a shadowy figure whose every move was suspect. Nia clung to his side, and while he smiled and told her, "We're okay, baby," his soul was cracking beneath the surface. The media now spun him as volatile, possibly corrupt. Protesters gathered outside his house again, this time demanding answers. Neighbors who once waved shut their blinds. His email was hacked. Old classmates emailed him hate. Even his clerk, Sophia, began to get threatening texts. "Still working for the criminal judge?" they read. She stayed anyway, loyal, fierce, but visibly afraid. Then came the cruelest cut. Nia, already traumatized from her expulsion, was nearly run down outside her new school by a black pickup truck that sped off, tires squealing. Darian rushed to the scene, found her huddled on the sidewalk, scraped and sobbing. He filed a report. Nothing happened. No witnesses. No license plate. Just a sick feeling in his gut that Decker wasn't done, that this was all just part of a plan to make him snap, to make him run, to strip every shred of humanity from his spirit. Darian took the threats seriously now. He moved Nia in with Jamal's sister, Keisha, who slept with a shotgun beside her door. He changed the locks, bought surveillance cameras. Still, the fear lingered. A ghost that rattled the windows at night. He pushed back, filed motions, pleaded for relief. But with each attempt, new obstacles surfaced. Rollins and Tate, Decker's goons, began trailing him in unmarked cars. Once they left a dead bird on his porch, feathers soaked in what smelled like gasoline. Another time, they keyed "liar" into the side of his daughter's Corolla. And yet the system stayed silent. The courts stalled. Internal affairs went quiet. The DA refused to drop the obstruction charges. And the whisper campaign against him grew louder. Blogs painting him as dangerous, unstable, a ticking time bomb with a robe. The final blow came during a court hearing for his motion to dismiss. Just when Darian thought the judge might rule in his favor, new evidence surfaced. A rusted 9mm handgun, claimed to be the murder weapon from a cold case in 1999, found coincidentally inside his chambers. Internal Affairs raided his courtroom mid-session, cuffed him in front of the jury, his gavel still warm from the last case. Darian shouted his innocence, but no one cared. Cameras flashed. Reporters screamed. The clip went viral in under 5 minutes. And for the second time in weeks, Darian Cole, a sitting Superior Court judge, was behind bars. He felt it this time. Felt the fear closing in, the hopelessness creeping like mold across his bones. In the solitude of his cell, bruised from being shoved into the wall during intake, Darian whispered his daughter's name again and again. Nia, Nia, Nia. A mantra to stay awake, to stay alive, to remind himself why he had to fight. But his body was giving out. A gash on his lip refused to clot. His knuckles, still raw from the warehouse fight with Decker, bled through the bandages. His throat was hoarse. He hadn't slept more than an hour in days. The guards mocked him every night. "Looks like you finally found your place, Your Honor." And all Darian could do was stare at the ceiling and count the cracks. Then came the glimmer. Sophia, defiant and brilliant, slipped him a burner phone through a sympathetic guard. Whispered through the bars, "I found the chain of custody records. That gun was moved last week. It's planted, Judge. I've got the logs." Darian clutched that phone like salvation. Every keystroke she sent, every screenshot, timestamp, signature, was another brick in the wall he'd build around the truth. She leaked the proof, sent it to the DA, to the judge, to the FBI. And somehow, by grace or grit, it worked. The case unraveled. The charge collapsed. Darian walked out again. Free, for now. But the damage lingered. The courthouse was no longer safe. Protesters were back, now mixed with militia-style agitators in tactical gear, calling for his resignation. His home was vandalized. "Traitor," scrawled across his mailbox in red spray paint. His car tires slashed, his daughter now waking up screaming in the middle of the night. Darian watched her curl up on the couch one evening, her arms still wrapped in gauze, and he nearly broke. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered, tears silently soaking into her hair. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. He exposed Decker's corruption. Recorded confessions. Staged a public trap. Brought cameras to a battlefield and made the world listen. He took down Hensley, survived her bullet, saw Decker fall, and still, the note came. Slipped under his door. No return address, no fingerprints, just 5 words. "You're next. We're not done." He stared at it for an hour. Nia at his side. Keisha cleaning a shotgun in the kitchen. Sophia upstairs patching fire-damaged files. And for the first time since this began, Darian didn't feel anger, or fear, or even sorrow. He felt resolve, because if this system, this beast, thought it could grind him down, erase him, turn his blood into silence, then it never understood who he was. He wasn't just a judge anymore. He was proof that even when they come for your car, your name, your bench, your home, your daughter, you can still rise. Dr. Naomi Ellis stood frozen in the sterile hallway of Atlanta Memorial, her stethoscope dangling loosely around her neck, her breath caught in her chest like a scream too afraid to rise. The air was thick with antiseptic and irony. She had just saved a life in operating room 4B, a 3-hour surgery on a shooting victim, hands steady, heart pounding, the kind of miracle only experience and relentless focus could deliver. Yet now, only 10 minutes later, she was being followed down the hall by 2 hospital security officers, their eyes sharp, their voices tense. "Ma'am," one barked, "we're going to need to see some ID." Naomi blinked, stunned. "I'm the attending surgeon," she said, her voice calm but cracking at the edges. "My ID's clipped right here." She gestured to her badge, clearly displayed. But the second guard's hand was already reaching toward his radio. "We received a report about a suspicious woman wandering around the ICU," he said flatly. "We need to confirm you belong here." Belong. That word sliced her deeper than any scalpel ever could. She belonged here more than either of them, had worked 18-hour shifts, climbed every rung of the medical hierarchy, and still, her black skin made her invisible and threatening all at once. The humiliation didn't stop with the hallway interrogation. As doctors, nurses, and even her own interns passed by, some glanced away. Others paused to gawk as the scene unfolded. No one stepped in. The guards refused to apologize. One even muttered under his breath, "You people always think the rules don't apply." Naomi stood still, silent, letting the heat behind her eyes build until she had to blink it back. She couldn't cry here. Not now. Not where they already doubted her. She showed her ID. Proved again who she was. Only then did the guards back off. Not with remorse, but with the kind of contempt that said, "We could do this again. Anytime." And they would. She knew that now. She walked into the staff lounge and collapsed into a chair, her legs suddenly heavy with the weight of too many battles. Her hands still smelled faintly of the soap from the OR, but the tremble in them wasn't from surgery. It was rage. Quiet rage, the kind that builds over years of overlooked promotions, double-checked prescriptions, patients who asked to see the real doctor after she introduced herself. The kind that grows from knowing you have to be twice as calm, twice as brilliant, and still only be seen as barely enough. And today, after saving someone's life, she'd still been treated like an intruder in her own workplace, her own sacred space. Her phone buzzed. A message from her younger sister. "How's your day?" Naomi stared at it for a long moment, then typed, "Just got racially profiled at work, again." And this time it wasn't the first, just the loudest. Later that evening, after the patient stabilized and Naomi had finally peeled off her scrubs, she sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and let the tears fall. Not just for the guards, or for the whispering staff who'd looked at her like she was the problem, but for all the times she didn't cry. For the microaggressions, the patients who refused her care, the white male colleagues who took credit for her research, and the time a board member asked if she'd gotten her job through one of those diversity scholarships. For all the times she told herself, "Just push through, just keep going. You're strong, you're brilliant, they can't touch you." But they could touch her. They had touched her. Today proved it. But Naomi wasn't a woman built to break. That pain, raw and suffocating, hardened into something else as the tears dried. Resolve. She wasn't going to let this become another whispered injustice. She opened her camera, looked into the lens, and recorded a video. Her voice was steady, calm, but every word burned. "Today, I saved a life in the operating room. Then I was treated like a criminal in my own hospital. Security stopped me, demanded I prove I was a doctor. I did, again. But they didn't apologize. They just walked away, like it was normal. And that's the problem. It is normal. For women like me. For black professionals in white spaces. We don't get the benefit of the doubt. We get suspicion, surveillance, silence. But I'm not staying silent. I'm Dr. Naomi Ellis. I belong here. And so do all the others coming after me." She hit post. The video went viral in hours. Comments flooded in. Doctors, nurses, lawyers, pilots. So many black professionals who shared similar stories of being questioned, doubted, degraded, and thousands of supporters who saw her pain and stood with her. But with the outpouring came backlash, anonymous messages, hate emails, affirmative action trash. "You probably forged your degree. Play the race card some more." Naomi read them all, her jaw tight, her stomach knotted. But she didn't stop. She kept speaking. She appeared on morning news shows, spoke at panels, met with civil rights groups. And while she told her story with poise, inside, she was breaking. Because the hospital hadn't issued an apology. The guards hadn't been disciplined. And her supervisor had the nerve to call her into his office and say, "Naomi, you've got to understand, this kind of attention isn't good for the institution." The institution. As if her dignity were a disruption, as if their silence wasn't. Naomi stood up from his office chair and said, voice flat with exhaustion, "You're right. I don't belong at this institution. Not if protecting racism is more important than protecting your doctors." She walked out, her white coat swinging behind her like a flag she no longer had to earn. She resigned the next day. But her story didn't end there. Because this is what they didn't expect. That a black woman stripped of her position, of her dignity, would still stand. That she'd found her voice not inside their walls, but outside of them. Naomi launched an organization, White Coat, Not White Silence, dedicated to protecting and empowering black healthcare workers who face systemic bias. She held workshops, fought for hospital equity audits, filed official complaints not just for herself, but for every underpaid, overlooked black nurse, janitor, and med student too afraid to speak, and the movement grew. Within 6 months, 3 hospitals revised their security protocols after partnering with her organization. 4 doctors reported racial profiling to HR after watching her interviews. One of those hospitals even reached out and asked her to return, not as a surgeon, but as a board consultant for racial equity. She declined. Because Naomi wasn't going back to patch wounds in a broken system. She was building a new one. Still, the pain lingers. The trauma isn't gone. Naomi still wakes up some nights, heart pounding, reliving that moment in the hallway, the sting of suspicion, the shame of being doubted in the place she'd given her life to. Her hands, the ones that used to hold scalpels, now hold microphones and protest signs. And sometimes she misses the OR, the rhythm of sutures, the stillness before a heart restarts. But what she's doing now is surgery too, in a way. She's cutting open a system built on doubt and stitching in something honest, something just. So if you're watching this, if you've felt invisible, erased, disrespected for the color of your skin, even in places you've earned, fought for, bled for, Naomi Ellis sees you. And she's not backing down. Dr. Naomi Ellis never imagined that saving lives would nearly cost her everything. On a rain-slick Thursday evening, she stepped out of Operating Room 3C at Atlanta Memorial. Her surgical gloves still streaked with blood, her pulse steady but her heart racing. The patient, a young boy shot in the abdomen, was stable now, breathing because of her hands, because of the 10 years she'd poured into this job. But what waited outside that OR wasn't gratitude. It was accusation. Security guards, 2 of them, white, tall, expressionless. Their presence wasn't an emergency response. It was an ambush. "We need to see your ID," one said, his tone empty but loaded. Naomi blinked, confused, her badge already clipped to her chest, blood-stained scrubs and all. "I'm the attending," she replied. But it didn't matter. Someone had reported a suspicious black woman in restricted surgical quarters. That's all it took. Her credentials, her Harvard degree, her awards, none of them mattered at that moment. She was black, she was breathing, she was visible, and that was enough. They took her down to the administrative floor in front of everyone. She didn't resist. Couldn't. Her body was trained for precision, for healing, not for combat. But inside, something broke. Not just from the humiliation, not just from being profiled in the very place she'd given her life to, but from what came next. Because within 24 hours, she was suspended pending investigation. No explanation, no hearing, no chance to speak. The hospital's internal memo stated vaguely, "Compliance and behavioral review." Naomi read the words over and over in disbelief. She knew what it meant. She was being silenced, swept under the rug like so many black professionals before her who dared to exist unapologetically in elite spaces. But what the hospital didn't know, what no one knew, was that Naomi had already begun digging into the system weeks ago, and she had secrets they didn't want revealed. For months, Naomi had been tracking patient assignments and treatment delays across departments. What she found disturbed her, a pattern of subtle racial bias. Black patients triaged later, tested slower, referred less often to specialists, discharged earlier. She wasn't paranoid, she was precise, and she documented everything. Late-night spreadsheets, phone calls with whistleblowers, redacted reports forwarded to a burner email. She wasn't just a doctor anymore. She was a shadow in the hospital's walls, uncovering something far worse than security bias. She was tracing a web, one with powerful names at the center, and that made her dangerous, which made what happened next even more terrifying. 2 nights after her suspension, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, except one thing: her laptop, the one with the files. No fingerprints, no security footage, no forced entry. Only a single post-it note left on her bathroom mirror, written in blocky black marker. Let it go. That night, Naomi didn't sleep. She didn't cry. She sat in the dark, her knees pulled to her chest, a kitchen knife in hand, the weight of silence pressing against her ribs. She didn't know who had done it. She didn't know who was watching. But she knew this: the investigation wasn't about her behavior. It was about the truth she'd unearthed. They weren't just trying to discredit her. They were trying to erase her. So she vanished. No, not completely. Not the kind of vanishing that made headlines. The kind that slipped between headlines. She cut off her phone, moved in with an old mentor across town, wore hoodies, sunglasses, started using public libraries for internet access. She went quiet, but not idle. The files were backed up on a cloud drive under a fake name, and she started working with a journalist known only by the pseudonym Hex. He was young, brilliant, and had been chasing medical corruption stories for years. Together, they mapped a trail of institutional negligence, forged consent forms, and buried malpractice records, all disproportionately impacting black patients. And the kicker? The hospital board knew. They'd even signed off on legal settlements sealed with confidentiality clauses. Naomi had names, dates, signatures, and now they knew she had them. A week later, her mentor's car was hit while Naomi was supposed to be in it. A hit and run. Wrong car, wrong seat. But the message landed: "We can reach you. Anywhere." Naomi didn't run this time. She leaned in. That night, she uploaded the first batch of files to Hex, along with a single message: "If anything happens to me, publish everything." Then she did something unthinkable. She went back. To the hospital. Disguised under a surgical mask, fake credentials, and scrubs from a friend, she entered during a shift change. The security system was outdated. She knew the blind spots. She made her way to the server room, plugged in a flash drive, downloaded internal email chains between the board and risk management, found footage of an ER patient denied a CT scan despite textbook stroke symptoms, found signatures, timestamp mismatches, proof. Then, As alarms began to stir, she planted one more flash drive. This one filled with a decoy virus programmed to flood every screen with a single phrase: "How many more have to die before you care?" She escaped just as security locked down the building, and she went public the next morning. Naomi stood on the steps of City Hall in a gray hoodie, face bare, voice steady. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She read names, 37 of them, of Black patients harmed by the negligence she uncovered. Then she said one sentence that echoed across every live stream, every news anchor's script, every corner of the internet. "I was trained to heal wounds, but no one trained me for the pain of knowing they only let you be a doctor until you question who you're saving." And she dropped the mic. The internet exploded. The files went viral. Naomi Knows trended for days. Protests formed outside the hospital. Board members resigned. An FBI investigation launched. The Georgia Medical Ethics Board announced emergency hearings. Naomi received hundreds of messages from other Black doctors. "Thank you for saying what we couldn't." But she also received death threats. Again. And another note, this one shoved into her mailbox in the middle of the night. "Next time it won't be a car crash. Shut up." But Naomi didn't shut up. She was subpoenaed, sat before a grand jury, testified for 9 hours. Tears ran down her cheeks as she described the child whose cancer was misdiagnosed, the grandmother whose stroke was dismissed as anxiety, the man who died waiting for an EKG that never came. She showed the photos, the forms, the patterns. And when she was done, the jury room fell silent. The DA leaned forward and whispered, "You just cracked this whole city wide open." But Naomi didn't smile, because she knew it wasn't over. The hospital's CEO, one of the central architects of the cover-up, vanished 2 days later, fled the country. And Naomi's inbox filled with warnings. "They'll come after you next." She lives with guards now, travels in tinted vehicles, keeps a panic button in her pocket, sleeps with a light on. Her world narrowed, but her voice never did. She lectures, publishes, fights. And yes, some days the fear creeps in. Some nights she wonders if it's worth it. The sleepless hours, the burned bridges, the friends who stopped calling, the parts of herself she'll never get back. But then she opens her inbox and sees a message from a medical student in Detroit. "Because of you, I didn't quit. I stayed in the program. I'm going to be a surgeon. Thank you." And she breathes, stands up, goes back to the fight. Because Dr. Naomi Ellis didn't just expose a scandal. She declared a war on silence, a war she's still fighting, and now you're a part of it too. Dr. Naomi Ellis hadn't slept in 36 hours when it happened, the kind of exhaustion where your bones ache, your vision blurs, and your heart beats on autopilot. She had just finished a 14-hour surgery, one of the longest of her career, removing a bullet from a teenage boy's liver after a gang shooting left him clinging to life. The boy's mother had hugged her, sobbing after Naomi emerged from the operating room, still in blood-streaked scrubs, too tired to cry, too wired to rest. This, saving lives, was all she'd ever wanted, all she'd ever fought for. And yet, minutes later, as she walked through the ICU hallway to wash her face and breathe, her entire world shattered with 7 words. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you work here?" The voice was sharp, commanding, not curious. 2 white hospital security officers stood in her path, hands already near their holsters. The hallway went silent. Nurses glanced away. No one spoke. 1. Naomi blinked, the question hanging in the air like a slap. She gestured to her hospital ID, clipped clearly to her scrubs, her voice dry. "Yes, I'm Dr. Ellis, attending surgeon." But they didn't care. One stepped closer. "We had a report about a suspicious individual in a restricted zone." Suspicious. That word. Naomi had heard it whispered her whole life, but never here. Not in the hospital where she'd risen to the top, not in the halls where her name was engraved on plaques. And yet now, her black skin, her tired eyes, her quiet presence was a threat. They escorted her to the administrative office like a criminal. She could feel the stares behind her, the whispers, the silence that screamed louder than accusations. She was questioned for 30 minutes, asked to confirm where she'd been, what she was doing. If she had any proof, she had been in the operating room. Proof? She'd just saved a life. Her hand still trembled from adrenaline. But they didn't see that. They didn't see her. She was released with no apology. Just a cold, "Thank you for cooperating." She stood outside the building, rain falling in light drizzles, staring up at the place that once felt sacred and safe. And for the first time in 15 years of medicine, Naomi felt like a stranger in her own white coat. She drove home numb, sat in the car outside her apartment, and cried into the steering wheel for 30 straight minutes. But what no one knew, not yet, was that Naomi had been keeping a secret. Weeks before the hallway incident, she had discovered a pattern, one she couldn't ignore. Late one night, reviewing charts from different departments, she noticed that Black patients were disproportionately assigned to underfunded wards, had longer wait times, fewer referrals, more early discharges. It wasn't just one case, it was dozens. Quiet, insidious bias hidden behind statistics. Naomi didn't just see numbers, she saw faces. The Black mother told she was overreacting about her child's breathing. The elderly Black man discharged before his test results came back. She started documenting everything, creating spreadsheets, taking photos, saving emails. She brought it to a supervisor. He told her flatly, "That's not your concern, Naomi. Focus on your job." And so she dug deeper, quietly, carefully, risking everything. Then her laptop was stolen. Someone broke into her apartment while she was on a night shift. Nothing else was taken. Not her jewelry, not her cash. Just her laptop. And the external hard drive she always kept near it. The files were gone. But that wasn't the worst part. A single sticky note was left on her pillow. Just 4 words, scrawled in black marker. "Drop it. Walk away." Her blood ran cold. She didn't sleep for 2 nights. She checked every window, every lock. She felt watched. She changed her passwords, moved her documents to a hidden cloud drive, and kept going. Because now she knew. This wasn't just racism. It was corruption. Institutional. Protected. And someone was trying to keep her quiet. Her worst fears came true when the hospital suspended her, citing disciplinary investigation into behavioral conduct. No hearing, no questions. Just a cold, clinical letter delivered by email. Her badge was deactivated, her parking revoked. No one stood up for her, not even the colleagues who called her the best surgeon we've got. She became a ghost overnight. Her name scrubbed from the rotation list. Her office door locked. Her calls unanswered. Patients emailed her directly, asking why she'd disappeared. She didn't know how to explain. Because I told the truth? Because I noticed the wrong numbers? Because I'm Black and unafraid? Naomi spiraled. Nights bled into mornings. Her confidence cracked under pressure. She began questioning herself. Was I wrong? Was I paranoid? But the pain didn't lie, and neither did the numbers. So she did what no one expected. She vanished. Not forever. Not publicly. She stayed in the city but moved into her cousin's guest house, shut off social media, and started contacting investigative journalists. Most ignored her. One called her emotional. But one replied, Hex. A tech-savvy, faceless journalist who had exposed corruption in a major university just the year before. They met in a crowded coffee shop. She handed over her documents, encrypted files, patient data, email trails. Hex's eyes widened. This is huge. Naomi didn't smile. It's happening everywhere, but this place is about to break. That same night, she received a threatening email. No subject, no sender, just a single message. People die for less, Dr. Ellis. Naomi didn't flinch. She felt something shift in her chest. The fear was still there, but it was burning now into something else. Fire. Resolve. Fury. She returned to the hospital 2 weeks later, not through the front, through the basement access. Dressed in scrubs borrowed from an old friend, she navigated the hallways she knew like the back of her hand, past camera blind spots she had memorized over years. She snuck into the server room, downloaded encrypted records, board communications, redacted incident reports, risk assessments about racial disparities that had been hidden from public view. She found it all, the proof, the motive, the names. And then she walked straight out the front door. 2 days later, the screens across Atlanta Memorial flickered at 7:01 a.m. Patients, staff, doctors, phones, computers, tablets. Every screen. A black screen. White text. How many have suffered so this hospital could stay quiet? Ask your board. The message stayed up for exactly 90 seconds, then vanished. But by then the files had already been sent to Hex, to the city council, to the press, to a civil rights law firm. By 9 a.m., her name was trending nationally. By noon, Dr. Naomi Ellis held a press conference, standing at the courthouse steps in a charcoal blazer, her voice unwavering as she listed the names of every patient failed by bias, misdiagnosis, or dismissal. 38 names. Some alive, some gone. One was a 6-year-old girl. One was her own aunt, who'd died in the same hospital 6 years earlier after being told she was just dehydrated. The world wept. But the hospital didn't. They denied everything. Accused her of theft, sabotage, labeled her mentally unstable. They released a letter calling her unfit for medical leadership. And the next night, her cousin's house was firebombed. They escaped with minor burns. But the message was clear. This isn't over. Naomi went into protective custody. But even there, she wrote, spoke, appeared on video interviews, donated her award money to fund a legal watchdog group, and slowly, painfully, the tide turned. The FBI opened an inquiry. The State Ethics Board launched formal charges against 5 hospital executives. The CEO resigned. 2 doctors were suspended. New legislation was proposed for racial bias audits in healthcare. And Naomi, Dr. Naomi Ellis, was offered reinstatement. She declined. You don't fix a broken house by moving back in. You bulldoze it and build something new. Today, she runs a foundation, the Ellis Project, that trains medical students to detect and dismantle systemic bias before they ever touch a patient's chart. She speaks at universities, at hospitals, at conferences. She's been nominated for awards. written about in Time, Forbes, and The Lancet. But most importantly, she hears the truth every day from the people she inspired. Black nurses who didn't quit because they saw her stand tall. Med students who once thought they didn't belong, now wearing white coats with pride. Patients who finally got answers because someone refused to stay quiet. But Naomi still wakes up some nights to silence too heavy, to memories too sharp. She still remembers that hallway, that stare, that moment where everything could have ended, but didn't, because she didn't walk away. She stood up, and now she stands for everyone else. Dr. Naomi Ellis never imagined her white coat would one day feel like a target. For years, she had worn it with pride, a symbol of purpose, of discipline, of resilience. From her grueling years at Johns Hopkins to becoming one of the youngest lead trauma surgeons at Atlanta Memorial, Naomi had carved her name into the walls of medicine through sheer will and sacrifice. But none of it mattered the night she was accused of being an intruder in the very hospital where she saved lives. She had just stepped out of surgery, a young black boy stabbed during a carjacking, her gloved hands still trembling from adrenaline, her body drenched in exhaustion. The mother had sobbed in her arms minutes earlier, whispering, "God sent you." But as Naomi walked down the ICU corridor, all that dissolved when two white security officers stopped her mid-step. "We had a report," one said, "of a suspicious person in scrubs wandering around." Her hospital badge gleamed under the fluorescent light. Her name was stitched into her chest. And still, they questioned her, as if she didn't belong. "Do you work here?" they asked, the words slicing through her. She answered softly, evenly, because she knew what could happen if she didn't. "I'm Dr. Ellis, the attending on trauma tonight." They didn't believe her, not at first. And when they finally let her go, the damage had already been done. She stood in the staff restroom minutes later, palms pressed to the sink, trying to remember when being excellent stopped being enough. What the guards didn't know, and what no one at the hospital had known, was that Naomi had been secretly investigating racial disparities in patient care. Not as an activist, as a doctor who couldn't unsee the truth. Black patients were being diagnosed later, treated slower, given fewer pain medications, discharged sooner. She noticed it first in the ER logs, names and times that didn't match the care timelines. Then came the patterns in billing, patient outcomes, surgery referrals. Naomi spent months gathering data, copying files onto encrypted drives, documenting stories staff swept aside. "You're reading into it too much," one supervisor had warned. But Naomi wasn't guessing. She was watching, calculating, cross-referencing case files with quiet rage. What she found wasn't just uncomfortable. It was systemic, institutional, a quiet pattern of prejudice hiding in statistics and charts. She had names, dates, evidence, and she was preparing to bring it to the board. But after that hallway encounter, something shifted. The next morning, she was locked out of her hospital email. Hours later, she was called into a cold administrative meeting and told she was being placed on indefinite leave pending investigation. No one explained what the investigation was about, just that her behavior was under review, her badge was deactivated, her access revoked, her voice erased. In 24 hours, she went from lead surgeon to ghost. And then came the real blow. Someone broke into her apartment. Nothing stolen, except her laptop, and a small red flash drive she always kept tucked in the drawer next to her bed, the one with every file she'd collected. She found the drawer open, a sticky note on her nightstand with 4 words written in marker. "You're playing with fire." Naomi didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark, listening to every creak, every whisper of the wind outside, clutching her phone, heart pounding like war drums in her chest. The next morning, she drove across the city to stay with her cousin, a schoolteacher who lived in a modest brick home with iron locks on every window. That's when she reached out to the Fourth Line, a small independent media outlet known for breaking controversial stories the mainstream networks wouldn't touch. One of their reporters, an anonymous voice named Milo, responded almost instantly. "If your story is real," Milo wrote, "it could rock this city." Naomi responded with a single line, "Meet me in person. I have files." They met in the back of a library 2 nights later, Naomi wearing a hoodie pulled low, Milo a wiry man in glasses who typed as she spoke. For 3 hours, she told him everything: names, cases, patient stories, the missing flash drive, the silent retaliation. Milo sat still the whole time, nodding slowly, until finally he leaned back and said, "If what you're saying is true, they're not just trying to silence you. They're protecting something." Naomi nodded. "Then we expose it." And that night, Naomi's cousin's car was slashed. The same night, her phone began receiving strange calls. No numbers, just silence. And then an anonymous email. "One more step, and we ruin you." But Naomi had already stepped too far to stop. She and Milo began working in secret, bouncing files through encrypted servers, building timelines, confirming data with public records. She had just begun to breathe again when the hospital's lawyers filed a formal complaint against her, claiming she had unlawfully obtained confidential records. The media began to turn. Some painted her as unstable, others as a liar. Naomi walked into a coffee shop one morning and saw her name on a tabloid headline: "The Doctor Who Snapped." But the worst came when her cousin found their house broken into. The only thing taken: a photo of Naomi as a child in scrubs, taped to the refrigerator. The next night, a brick shattered their living room window. Written on the brick in red paint, "Stop or bleed." Naomi's cousin sent her away, begging her to hide. So she did. But not in silence. With Milo's help, she created a burner video, voice disguised, face blurred, but the story clear. She uploaded it at midnight under the title, "I'm a Doctor, and they're covering up medical racism." It went viral in 4 hours. By morning, the city was ablaze. People demanded answers. Protesters gathered outside Atlanta Memorial. Hashtags surged. "Stand with Naomi," "White Coat Truth," "Heal, Don't Hide." But even then, the hospital denied everything. Claimed the video was fake, called her a rogue former employee. And then Milo made the final move. He published the names of the executives involved in the suppression, their email chains, their memos, their signatures. Within 48 hours, the hospital's CEO resigned. By the end of the week, the Board of Ethics launched a formal review. One of the doctors Naomi had accused sent a panicked resignation email. Another fled the country. But Naomi's victory came quietly one evening, as she stood alone outside the hospital she once called home. She watched the windows flicker with new staff. She watched patients arrive. She listened to the crowd chanting her name not as a warning, but as a promise. And then she got the call. The state medical board had cleared her. The hospital had offered to reinstate her. Naomi said no. "You don't return to a house that tried to burn you down," she told the press. Instead, she launched the Ellis Foundation, a national watchdog coalition for racial bias in hospitals. She began speaking across the country, at universities, policy panels, even Congress. But she never forgot the note. The brick, the knife edge of every step, the fear, the nights she didn't sleep, the moments she thought, maybe they'll kill me before they listen. And she never forgot the patients, those failed by silence. Today, Naomi is alive, not just in body, but in purpose. She wears her white coat again, not for the system, but for the future. And when young black medical students ask her, "How did you survive?" she looks them in the eye and says, "I didn't, I burned, and I built something from the ash." Naomi Ellis stood at the edge of the rooftop garden overlooking downtown Atlanta, the morning light painting gold across the skyline as wind rustled the leaves of a newly planted magnolia. The hospital's quiet way of saying, "We're sorry," without ever saying the words. Behind her, a press conference had just ended. Cameras folded down. Microphones were unplugged. The crowd had thinned. But Naomi stayed behind, not for the photos, not for the applause, but for the silence, for the moment to feel what victory finally tasted like after walking through fire. The medical board had not only cleared her name, they had publicly acknowledged the systemic failures she had exposed. 3 executives had resigned. 5 doctors were under review. The hospital board had pledged to fund racial bias training statewide and established an independent oversight committee named after her, the Ellis Accountability Initiative. But none of that erased what Naomi had endured. Being accused, erased, threatened, hunted, all for speaking the truth. She bore the scars of a fight she never asked for, but refused to lose. It had been over a year since the night she was pulled aside in the hallway of her own hospital and asked, "Do you work here?" The question that started it all, that shook her world and revealed a rot buried deep beneath the marble floors and shiny credentials. That one moment of humiliation unraveled everything, but also revealed her strength. She had gone from surgeon to whistleblower, from healer to hunted, from invisible to invincible. Along the way, she lost friends, safety, and sleep. Her name was dragged through mud. Her story was twisted. Her life was nearly taken. And yet, she never stopped fighting, not for herself, but for the people who couldn't afford to. The mother who didn't know her child's breathing was being ignored. The grandmother misdiagnosed. The man who died waiting in a lobby because of the color of his skin. Naomi had carried all of them with her, each a reason to keep going when the fear tried to win. And now, they were watching her stand tall, reinstated, celebrated, free, but not unchanged. Naomi took a deep breath, her white coat fluttering behind her as the wind pushed against it. Not the same coat from before. This one had her name embroidered with a new title, Founder, Ellis Foundation for Medical Equity. After her reinstatement, Naomi had declined returning to surgery full-time. She still practiced, still mentored, but her mission had changed. She was now a guardian of justice within the walls she once believed were immune to corruption. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, teaching med students, writing policy drafts. Her foundation launched clinics focused on equitable treatment and funded scholarships for underrepresented medical students. She wasn't just exposing problems, she was building solutions. One day, a young black girl walked up to her after a conference in Baltimore, no more than 12, clutching a notebook and wide-eyed with nerves. "Dr. Ellis," she whispered, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Naomi knelt down, tears already stinging her eyes. "You don't have to be like me," she said, smiling. "You just have to be braver than the people who tell you no." And that was her legacy. Not just in reform, but in hope. Because the truth is, we live in a world where doing the right thing often comes with a cost. Standing up for what's right doesn't guarantee applause. Sometimes it gets you silence. Sometimes it gets you threats. But Naomi's story reminds us, you don't speak up because it's easy. You speak up because it's necessary. She didn't want to be a hero. She wanted to be heard. And in choosing truth over comfort, she became both. There's a lesson in her journey for all of us. That silence protects no one. That systems don't change themselves. People do. That one voice, trembling but true, is louder than 1,000 lies whispered in halls of power. So if you've ever been afraid to speak up, if you've ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, and play it safe, if you've ever felt like doing the right thing meant doing it alone, remember Naomi. Remember how she was targeted, accused, threatened, chased, nearly broken, and still chose to rise. Remember how she turned fear into fire, silence into strength, and injustice into change. And most importantly, remember that someone is always watching, someone who might follow your footsteps, someone who needs your courage to find their own. Because courage is contagious, and change starts with one person who refuses to look away. So what do you take from Naomi's story? Is it the bravery, the pain, the power of truth? Whatever it is, hold on to it. Let it guide you, because someday you may be the one who's called to stand. And when that moment comes, don't ask, will it cost me? Ask, will it protect someone else? Because that's what Naomi did, and look how far it carried her. If Naomi's story inspired you, comment, #I stand with Naomi, and share your favorite moment from her journey. What lesson from her fight would you carry into your own life? Share it below. We read every comment. Hit that like button if her courage touched your heart, and you believe stories like this need to be heard. Subscribe now to this channel for more powerful stories that expose injustice, uplift real heroes, and remind us all that one voice, just one, can change the world. Because the fight for justice isn't over, and we rise stronger when we rise together.